I was 15 at the time and spending the weekend at my best friend's house. My name is Ta, and two of my other friends, Jade and Shauna, were there too. Our friend Jack lived across town and wanted us to come over to hang out. It was a 10 to 12 minute walk to get there, but it was 9 p.m. on a Saturday night and Tilia was skeptical about walking across town in the first place, so she just stayed behind. The rest of us figured since there were 3 of us walking there, we should be safe, and for the most part, we were. We got to Jack's house, and he'd been drinking out of his mother's liquor cabinet. We were 17 at the time, and 2 acquaintances of ours who were dating each other and having problems in their relationship were drinking too. It was annoying for me to be there, if I'm being honest, since none of us wanted to drink, and one of the acquaintances was drunkenly spilling a life story to me about how she wanted to break up with her boyfriend because she was in love with her ex and yada yada yada. At 11:30 p.m., Jade and Shah decided to call Tua's mom, who honestly treated us as if we were her own children, to come and pick us up because no one wanted to walk back at almost midnight, even with there being 3 of us. The drunk girl didn't want to leave, so I felt bad and stayed behind and told Jad and Shauna that I'll just walk back later on. For better or for worse, I just didn't have a concept of fear. According to rumors at school, I was one of the most intimidating girls in her class, always carried a pocket knife on me, was going through my goth stage, etc., etc. I knew the town like the back of my hand too, so I didn't think that it was such a big deal. I finally leave, and this is where it gets creepy. So, I'm walking back across town to Tia's house by myself, just texting Jade the whole time to make sure that she was still awake so she could open the door for me. It was 12:30 a.m., and I was walking fairly fast, almost jogging, because I just had a feeling about being out by myself tonight for some reason, so I just kept up the pace. I make it to the main street in town, and Tila's house was 2 or 3 blocks away from it. A straight shot, pretty much. Well, I looked both ways before I crossed Main Street, and there was one car coming from my right in the distance, driving about 45 miles per hour, I'd say. So, I bolted across the street before the car came up. As soon as I did that, the car came to a screeching halt and whipped itself onto the road that I was walking on. Luckily, I heard the screeching tires, and my instincts instantly kicked in. I darted into the bushes in front of somebody else's house because my brain quickly comprehended that something just didn't seem right about a car driving so fast down the road. The speed limit in this town was like 25 miles per hour at this time of night, then making this quick turn just out of nowhere. I stayed crouched in the bushes. They were pretty thick, and like I said, I was going through a gothic phase, so I was wearing all black. Luckily, I had the night to my advantage, and I just watched this car slowly creep down the road next to the house that I was hiding outside of, almost like the people in the car were actually looking for me. I held my breath and watched it continue down the road and turned around in a parking lot, then watched it head back up to Main Street. As soon as that car got to the stop sign opposite from where I was going, I just bolted, and I have never run so fast in my life. All the while, too, I'm texting Jade with my difficult flip phone, telling her to open the door now. Everything was like it was on Q2, and I make it to the front steps of Tia's house, and as soon as I got to the first step, Jade opens the door, and that same car comes flying down the road that I was on, hitting the gas and revving the engine, passing the house. It honestly felt like the person or the people in the car were mad. Jade sees me, out of breath, though, barging into the house, asking me all of these questions, and as soon as she locks the door, I told her everything. The next morning, I told Tia, Shah, and Tia's mom about what happened too. And Tilia's mom pretty much went white because apparently a man had actually been caught a few towns away from ours for stalking and assaulting another woman around the same late hours of the night too. She pulled the news report up on her phone, and we read it, and I instantly recognized the car as the same one. Hello students. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing to my channel. I noticed that a lot of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed. Subscribing helps you stay updated with my latest videos and supports the channel, allowing me to create more awesome content for you. Thanks for watching. This happened when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I have a sister who is 8 years younger than me, so she was about 1 or 2 years old at the time. During the summer months in Calgary, Canada, my family and 3 to 4 other families would frequently have barbecues in Bonus Park. For those unfamiliar, Bonus Park is a large park in Calgary with numerous picnic areas, playgrounds, and fountains for kids to play in. The area is so large that it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to walk between the playgrounds, picnic areas, and bathrooms. We kids often left the adults to play in the fountains or playgrounds, and it was generally safe enough that this never caused any issues. I recall one time we were playing in our little bathing suits when I saw a tall guy with glasses and a large cowboy hat sitting on a bench just outside the fountain area, watching us. I was a naive kid who had never had any talks about stranger danger, and his cowboy hat made me automatically assume he was a park ranger. A couple of hours after leaving the fountains to eat and relax with the adults, my baby sister announced that she needed to use the bathroom. She was nearly potty trained at this point, but not completely. My mother asked me to take her to the bathrooms, which were about a 10-minute walk away. My friend, who was about my age, came along with me. I remember walking with them when the man approached us, said hello, and started a conversation. He was wearing a cowboy hat, and I again assumed he was a park ranger. He asked for our names and ages and had a very friendly demeanor, so our naive selves talked openly with him. I did notice, though, that he had a particular interest in my baby sister and at one point even asked to hold her. She was fussy and just wanted to walk. This went on until we reached the bathrooms, where we said goodbye to him and went inside. This was when even my naive self started to feel that something was wrong. My sister ended up having an accident on herself, and I asked my friend to stay with her in the bathroom while I ran back to the picnic area to get a change of clothes from my mother. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I found the same guy standing a couple of feet away, clearly waiting for something. That was when my alarm bells started going off. I ran back to the picnic area and told my mom that I thought some guy was following us. She came with me to the bathroom, and when the man saw me with my mother approaching from about 100 meters away, he quickly walked in the opposite direction as fast as possible without attracting attention. At the time, I pretty much forgot about what happened. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I suddenly realized the man waiting for us outside the bathroom was the same one who had been watching us play in our bathing suits hours before. I can only assume he had been waiting for hours until we left the adults after swimming to approach us. Also, that particular park did not have any park rangers. I don't really have any idea what his true intentions were, but I'm pretty sure they were not good. I live in Madagascar, the island off the east coast of Africa. Many people here still believe in magic, sorcery, and other such things, despite the country being predominantly Christian. My dad passed away in 2012, and he had many experiences in his life. Although he was a Christian and didn't believe in witchcraft or magic, even he admitted to experiencing something very strange in the 80s. My mom and aunt confirmed this story too. In 1985, before I was born, my dad caught pneumonia and was rushed to the hospital. My mom and aunt were there to look after him, buying medications and all that. My uncle, who is my aunt's husband, knew about black magic and traditional practices like witchcraft. When he visited my dad on the 4th or 5th day in the hospital, he told him something unusual. He gave my dad a piece of ginger and asked him to keep it in his hand for the next 2 days. When my dad asked why, my uncle told him that in the next 2 days, an evil person who wanted to harm him would come to visit his hospital room, and holding the ginger would keep this person away. My dad didn't believe a word of it, but my mom insisted because she knew my uncle was serious. So, my dad kept the ginger in his hand for the next 2 days. The very next day, while he and my mom were in the room, someone knocked on the door. My mom opened it, and one of my dad's co-workers and friends was there with some flowers. My mom invited him in, but the guy just stood there and said he wasn't going to enter. My dad saw him and told him it was okay to come in, but he just stood on the threshold, not moving. Then he did the strangest thing. He turned around and walked away quickly without saying a word. Later, when my dad returned to work, that coworker and friend were no longer there, and my dad never saw or heard from them again. I'm 17 now, but this happened when I was roughly 5 to 8 years old. Since it happened so long ago, I'm sure there are many things I've forgotten or unintentionally blocked out. Around the time I started kindergarten, we moved to a complex where I got a room of my own for the first time. I remember being scared to have a room all to myself, so I always made sure my closet door was firmly closed because I was very scared of monsters in my closet. I think this might have stemmed from my mom watching a lot of horror content around me, or maybe just a general childish fear. Shortly after we moved in, I woke up one night when it was dark. I could tell by my window, which was right next to my bed. My closet door opened, and this boy hovered very low to the ground, maybe an inch off it. He seemed about my height and size, but didn't make a sound as he moved. He hovered out of the closet, walked in a straight path to the window, but stopped midway at the foot of my bed and just stared at me. His face looked like melted glass, similar to the long-faced ghost kid from Coraline. Sorry, that's the only example I can think of. He wore a sailor suit like those from the 1950s. I remember wanting to scream, but I couldn't. I hid under my blankets for a long time. I don't remember what happened after that, but I assume I eventually fell asleep. It might have been a few days or even a week later when I saw him again. It was roughly the exact same encounter, so it doesn't stand out in my brain, but over the course of a few months, I gained the courage to look back at him. I was very scared, but he never did anything. He never climbed on my bed or got closer to me. He only ever stopped and stared at me, and that never changed. After I started looking at him, I learned that after he left the foot of my bed, he would go to the wall on the left and form a hole in the wall that he would go through. I remember a few times I would get up in the morning and try to see the portal, but of course it was never there. Over time, I stopped being scared. I remember the feeling of not being afraid when I looked back at him. After I wasn't scared anymore, I would get out of bed right after he left and try to go through the portal, but it would close before I could reach the wall. I remember one specific night when he didn't show up. I got confused because by that time, it had become a routine to see him every night. I got up and looked out my window to see him. He was feeding on a deer on the property. Deer were pretty common in the area. He didn't look up at me or anything, but I remember just staring at him. After we moved away from the complex, I never experienced anything like this again or even had a dream about him. Here are some other small details I want to add. He only existed in the complex. He never appeared at my school or daycare. My mom told me a few years ago that the neighbors in the complex would tell her that I would play games by myself, seemingly pretending that I was playing with another person. But I have no memory of that, so I don't know how reliable it is. From what I remember, no other kid in the complex experienced anything similar, including my two sisters who shared a room across from mine. I would tell people about the boy I saw, though it's taken me a long time to conclude that this was probably a paranormal experience. I wanted to share it here to see if anybody has had similar memories they carry with them. I drew the layout of my room and a recollection of what the boy looked like. The drawing isn't super detailed, and because it's drawn from memory, I'm sure my recollection has changed over time. This story takes place back in 2019. I was going through some issues with my family and was couch hopping, basically living out of my car. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in a while messaged me one day, saying she had heard I was homeless and asked if I needed a place to stay. We used to get along really well, so I moved into her house with her and her mom and shared a room with her. Her house was the leftmost in a fourplex, meaning her bedroom windows looked out to the neighbors, but the other wall of the house was shared with another person's house. It wasn't weird or run down, but the previous renter had sealed the front and both bedroom windows shut with nails and either painted or used some material that blocked the windows. You couldn't see in or out, only sunlight could come through. While there, I experienced a lot of weird things, but one event stood out the most. A couple of weeks leading up to it, I had been having really weird nightmares that I could never remember, but I always woke up out of breath and clutching my chest, trying to slow down my heartbeat. One day, my cousin was in the bathroom. There was only one door connected to our room, and the bathroom was relatively small. I noticed something almost engraved into the wood of the door. like somebody's name that had been painted over. We analyzed the carving and concluded it was a girl's name. I can't remember the name for the life of me. We just assumed it was a kid who carved it. After this discovery, things for me started to get worse. I began to feel extremely tired every time I was home and started waking up with an alarming amount of bruises and scratches that I couldn't explain. One day, my best friend came over, and while we were in the room, I told her about the name on the door. She practices Santeria, the Cuban version, so we often talk about spiritual things. She started joking about the name, but pronounced it incorrectly every time. Each time she said it wrong, I felt myself getting progressively angrier. Eventually, I rudely corrected her. We both looked at each other, and as my anger disappeared, I told her I had no idea why I got so upset about the name being said incorrectly. We let it go, assuming it was a random event. Some time passed, and I was still waking up with more bruises and scratches, looking like I was being heavily abused. One night, my cousin and her mom went out, leaving me home alone. I was in her bedroom watching TV with the door open, and I had a clear view of the living room and hallway, but all the lights were off, so it was complete darkness except for the TV. I got a FaceTime call from another friend who was in her car with her sister. During our conversation, I felt the urge to tell them about the name on the door. As soon as I finished explaining, I started to feel extremely lightheaded, like I was about to pass out. My vision blurred, and then I heard an extremely clear, almost church-sounding bell, like it was right next to my head. Then, absolute silence, like my ears had been stuffed with cotton. As I tried to clear my vision, I looked at the doorway and saw the figure of a girl, maybe 5 feet 6 inches, with waist-length black hair. That's all I could make out. I blinked again, and she was gone. The blurred vision and lightheadedness lasted for maybe another 1 to 2 minutes, and then I was finally back to normal. I picked up my phone, and my friend and her sister were sobbing, asking if I was okay. I told them I was fine, I just got disoriented. They told me that after I dropped my phone, they could hear a woman screaming bloody murder. They thought someone had come into the house and was hurting me. I was clearly confused because I wasn't screaming, and I definitely didn't hear any screaming. I closed the bedroom door after we got off the phone, and after they were done making sure I was okay, I just stayed awake the rest of the night, waiting for my cousin to get home. After that night, new bruises stopped appearing, and shortly after, I moved out and stopped speaking with that cousin due to different issues. To this day, I can remember the sound of that bell. It was so unsettling. I'll never forget that night. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel to be updated in my latest uploads. Thank you for watching.